Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Scene podcast. I'm your host, Jill Sitnick. Think of me as your psychedelic big sister trying to add a little bit of clarity to this new psychedelic renaissance that we're all experiencing. Today's session deals with first responders and trauma and the amazing work that Paul Walton is doing in New Mexico to help his coworkers with their, PTSD trauma from the job and using psychedelics and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy in the future to assist folks. This is an interesting conversation. If you know any first responders, this is an episode for them. And I think the best part is that Paul outlines how anybody anywhere in the U.S. can start to research this information for their own union, for their own group of first responders. It's a good episode. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Scene podcast. Today, I'm really excited to talk to Paul Walton. He is a proponent and advocate for our first responders. So I want to welcome Paul to the podcast. Hello.
For you. Thank you.
So Paul is very, very interesting. So let me give you his bio real fast. So he is the executive director of Firefighters for Plant Medicine and has been a firefighter for 17 plus years. I like how he put the plus in there. He's like, we got to get that plus in there. His goal is to change policy across New Mexico and beyond to allow access to medical cannabis and psychedelic-assisted therapy for first responders to help in the healing process. He is focused on mental health and plant medicine advocacy, kind of like me, awareness and education. And for him, it's not just a mission, it's a passion. And so with that, Paul, thank you so much for being here. Introduce yourself to the audience a little bit. Tell us your origin story. How the heck do you find yourself on Psychedelic Scenes podcast?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. First of all, appreciate you doing this and allowing for voices to be heard a little bit more. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different origin stories in our lives, right? In different sections of our lives. And this one, I'm a firefighter. So like you said, about 17 and a half years. So I've got a little bit more for retirement. But I found myself in a lot of situations that other firefighters and first responders find themselves in, and that is going through a career and not being or taught how to process trauma and your calls and all this other things that happen to you over time. Sleep deprivation, anxiety builds up, PTSD symptoms, pain, chronic injuries, different things like that. And so that's kind of really what led me into working in the cannabis sort of advocacy and then also psychedelics. And especially since New Mexico is now the third state to legalize Psilocybin, and they're working on the regulations and everything. In fact, this morning I was on a Department of Health advisory board, their first advisory board meeting. So they're going to be working on and hoping that they do some subcommittees or focus groups and then to get on one of those to kind of help with figuring out how we can help our first responders in cannabis, but obviously that's a psychedelic thing. So, but we're working in both these fields right now.
Mm-hmm. How did my origin story with psychedelics was my therapist suggested it. I said, no, I don't do those things. And then had to go look at some research to be convinced. What was your kind of dive into understanding or being willing to try these modalities to deal with trauma?
Well, so a long time ago, back in '89, that was my first. Yeah, exactly. It was a while ago. So that was my first psychedelic experience, actually. Okay. And I had some childhood traumas and different things like that, and so it really helped me a lot. To be honest with you, it's a whole nother story, but let's just say that it completely flipped me a 180 on that one particular first time. And so I became very curious with it, experimented a little bit with it, a little bit of a psychonaut from then. And then as I got older and became more responsible, then I got in the fire department and then stopped using anything. I had used cannabis in the past a little bit as well, but never much of a drinker. I've had drinks and I do that once in a while, but never been really much of a drinker. So I had cannabis as my, sort of medication or whatever back then, but the intent was a little bit different. So then what I found myself in is that I had an injury here at work and a hernia surgery. And the opiates that they give you, I was on those for the first 3 days. Well, I anticipated being off work for a little bit. And so I got a medical cannabis card from New Mexico. And I've never been good with pharmaceutical medications and drugs. I've always been kind of sensitive to them and side effects. And I had that with the opiates and just was uncomfortable and unpleasant. So we got some medical cannabis and I used that. What transpired was that not only did it help for my pain, but it brought me to this space of coming back to who I originally was before all these traumatic calls and different things that I've seen over the years. It started on my healing journey, to be honest. I'd done talk therapy and I've tried different modalities and they kind of scratch the surface a little bit. And it's hard I think, for first responders. One is trust issues, a big one, really opening up and things like that. So it wasn't super effective for me until I started using cannabis. And actually, I started using it in therapy as well, which was an amazing thing to do. It really helps to kind of break down those walls a little bit and open up a little bit, be able to talk about things that you normally wouldn't be able to talk about. And then I experimented again with some psilocybin, went up to Colorado and did a treatment. And again, exponential healing, that happened. So that's kind of the thing is, and then we started on the cannabis because that looked maybe a little bit easier to do, try to get cannabis for our firefighters. And we ended up with the union and a few other guys on our team. We were able to get cannabis for county firefighters. We're the only county in New Mexico that has been able to do it so far. But our hope is that we can educate other departments, and we can also possibly change some language in the medical cannabis bill and at the state level to allow access for at least certain first responders to use off-duty cannabis to help. And it's a tool. There's no fix-all, but it's an extra tool that is a lot safer than alcohol and a lot safer than a lot of other pharmaceutical medications as well. And then we're working with different sort of agencies. There's the New Mexico Equity Council is doing some focus groups for studies that are going to be done here at the university on psilocybin. So I'm going to do one of the focus groups and then hopefully get on one of the state committees or groups, whatever they decide to do, to just help educate on those nuances for first responders, how the barriers, the stigmas, different things like that, so they can be reachable to get this medication and this help.
About 10 million questions coming from that introduction. Thank you. I will say for the audience, I really believe that cannabis therapy is underrepresented in all of the conversation around psychedelics. I know people who have gone through cannabis therapy, having therapeutic journeys with a therapist during a cannabis experience, higher dose, obviously. And I really think, I always say MDMA, that's the first psychedelic I dealt with trauma. It kind of shut down the fear. I was able to relax. For folks who aren't in that kind of crisis state and need that heart opening per se, I've always thought cannabis is a very interesting option for them. So it's interesting that you started that way, because in my head I was like, oh, absolutely, that's perfect, and probably a far less stigma for people who were like, I don't do drugs, but okay, I can have a gummy. I've done a gummy, so okay, cannabis therapy makes sense to me.
Yeah.
You said your county and medical cannabis, what does that look like?
Yeah, so our goal with the cannabis committee for the union was to advocate for medical cannabis and to have firefighters have a medical card. And we still treat it that way. We treat it as a medical. It's definitely how it should be treated for us. For anybody like that that's using it for these purposes, right? Even when it's recreational, legal in certain states. So that's what our goal was, the medical side of things. It really just makes it more legitimate as well and more tolerable for certain people to swallow as well, you know? Um, so it was difficult. There was a lot of pushback for sure. There was a lot of rules and different department agencies that were kind of thrown at us, but we did our homework, federally, state, and there was nothing that was really preventing us other than the threat of termination if you test positive. So there was a lot of inconsistencies in policies and people that you would talk to about these sort of things. But other agencies have already done this. Other big departments. New York is a big department. Pittsburgh, Prince Williams, the city of Phoenix also changed their city policy. So that's what happened with us is just champion for this and just over and over and over and over educating our HR and risk management. And then one of our commissioners got involved and championed for us, Commissioner Levis. And so his view on this is it's safer than alcohol. It's illegal in the state and it can be very beneficial. So you should be able to use this. And so we were able to get it pushed through three commissioner votings on it, all unanimous, bipartisan, for us to be able to use this. And they actually changed county policy as well. So it's a three-tiered system. And the first tier is the only tier that actually gets randomly tested for THC. And that is if you carry a CDL or carry a firearm. And that's federal requirements. And then we're in the second tier. We still get randomly drug tested, but not with the THC in the test. So the only reason that we would be THC tested is if there was reasonable suspicion or in certain instances where there was like more of a severe accident and something like that. But we were also able to get urine out of drug testing for us, which is important. And that's important for, honestly, across the country, urine should be completely thrown out of drug testing. It does not show impairment whatsoever. And in fact, in cannabis for THC, if you did something currently like right now, it wouldn't show up for hours later in urine. So it doesn't show current consumption absolutely, at all. So we have saliva in our testing, and then we also have blood testing, blood testing is definitely more invasive, but it's definitely more accurate of what is currently in your system, even though impairment is kind of hard to tell still. So that's a big concern across the country with cannabis is the impairment and how do you test for that, right? Honestly, if someone can figure that out, you would be a very rich person. So that's the hardest thing that everybody talked about is how do we show and how do we test for impairment? So.
Well, I think it's interesting when you're talking about this particular population. I tend to think of first responders as very motivated, very caring, very dedicated folks. I'm going to just go out on a limb and say the folks who are going to purposely be impaired doing this very important job are probably very low and potentially accidental. Yes. So I appreciate everything you just explained, but I don't see this population as the population that's going to go, woo-woo.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly true. So, one of the things that we've said before is that we're treated with responsibility and to save lives, to risk our own lives. We are, afforded that also that same trust in doing prescription medications or drinking alcohol and not being impaired at work or, being responsible with that sort of stuff. And people lapse and it happens. But, you talk about cannabis and it's so less harming than anything else. We should be afforded the same, responsibility and access to that as well and have the same rights as any other citizen when we're not at work. When we're at work, just like anyone else, there's no impairment. You shouldn't be doing anything like that. And I mean, that's pretty common knowledge and agreement across the board on those sort of things. But and you're right about like first responders. One of the biggest things I've been saying all along and with treatment and then psychedelic treatment and everything else is we're our own worst enemies. We're the first ones to help someone else and the last ones to help ourselves. That's the biggest barrier that we have honestly to treatment for first responders.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this is just me being super curious and being super
Yeah,
nosy now.
absolutely.
Are you thinking about, as we move towards more psychedelic access, obviously the therapy component, like are you thinking of wrapping into any, the word is not contract, but like what you've set up with the county, are you thinking of wrapping in a therapy component that would be allowed or encouraged via insurance, or like
Yeah.
how is that part? It's a terribly worded question, but I think you know where I'm
No,
going.
I totally understand where you're going with that. Yeah, so that is part of the problem with the state bill with the cannabis. The Lynn and Aaron Compassionate Use Act is the medical bill for the state of New Mexico. And one of the things that was in that bill was that an employer could deem an employee safety sensitive if they wish to. So it's kind of arbitrary. But then if you're safety sensitive, it states that this bill will not protect you. It doesn't say that you can't use or have an agreement with your employer, but it just says that you won't be protected. So one of the things that
Protected from getting fired?
yes, exactly,
Okay.
protected by the bill, like it was a medical, a regular medical prescription or something like that. And I can circle back to that because there's another part of that whole thing. But so that's one of the things that I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen in the regulatory stuff with the psilocybin therapy is that first responders are specifically recognized in these regulations for treatment so that it will be state law, right? And then your employer can't. And it's not something that you would go to work and do, right? This is a therapy session that with facilitators, right? Professionals and everything like that. And preparation, integration, which is really probably the hardest part and then no one wants to really work on and do. That's, that's going to be the tricky part. But yeah, so just making sure that there is recognition in there and there's nuances in there that recognize the barriers and stigmas to getting treatment for firefighters and the fact that they also have to go to back to work, you know?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm curious, what was the response? Like when this was made available to the folks in the
To our
county?
members?
Yeah. What was the response?
It was pretty significant, to be honest with you. I keep hearing people talk about it all the time, every day, how it's helped them or what they're doing and things like that. We hear a lot of people are sleeping better, a lot less anxiety, better family time. We've had some guys say that it saved their lives, to be honest with you. And we've had several guys that stopped drinking completely. And other guys have cut back on their drinking a lot. So we've had significant, incredible results, to be honest with you. So it's a very positive thing. Again, it may not be for everyone, and it shouldn't be the only tool that you use to escape or something like that. If you use it for a medical intent, I think that it works in a different way, to be honest. So intent has a lot to do with what you're doing with these medications. And so we're never advocating that these are miracle drugs or miracle cures for anything. They're just a good tool in the toolbox, and that can actually help a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that there is precedence. I'm in Pennsylvania, so as soon as you said Pittsburgh, I was like, oh, PA's in there. Okay. So
Yeah, they were,
oh,
I think Oregon was one of the first, like Eugene, I think Pittsburgh was close in there. So they've had it for, I want to say like 4, maybe 5 years now. And I talked to them. They were one of the first people that I talked to about this. And because they went through the city council and everything to get this. In fact, they're the only, as of when I talked to them probably a year or two ago, they were the only union in Pittsburgh that had this. And in fact, we're the only union right now in Bernalillo County that has this, or in New Mexico. So we kind of thought that dominoes would start falling a little bit quicker than this, but I think people are a little bit nervous still about funding and different things, but none of that has come up. And we've pretty much eliminated any talk about that. So we'll see what happens here in the future.
Yeah, Pennsylvania is moving at a snail's pace, in my opinion, snail's
Yeah.
pace with cannabis. Well, so you started to actually answer my next question, is for all the folks who are out there, several of whom I'm sure are first responders, is there kind of a playbook or kind of first 2 or 3 steps that they would be able to start this ball rolling for either their county or their union? I don't know if a county is an entire union.
Yeah, so for us, the Albuquerque fire and then Bernalillo County fire, we are actually under the same union umbrella, even though we're two different agencies,
Okay.
but we are together under the same union here. So it's a pretty big and strong union in New Mexico. But yeah, so I'd say the first things is just to really get all your information down. So look at the federal level, look at DOT. Do you have a CDL? Then you're not DOT required to be tested. And then the SAMHSA, they oversee the drug-free workplace policy. There was a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation about that with testing and the requirements. And then people thought that they were going to lose federal funding because of it. And that was one of the first arguments that we heard. However, I've talked to SAMHSA multiple times. There is no actual drug testing requirement from them. And there absolutely is no random testing requirement. So according to them, there is no funding loss because you're not violating that policy.
And what is that organization?
The SAMHSA,
Yeah.
and because they oversee all the safety stuff for federal and everything like that, and that has to do with the Drug-Free Workplace Act, and that's what a lot of agencies use. I think every business has to use that or something, and it basically states that you got to have these policies in place and have access to treatment if people need it, and then basically just that you don't have people coming to work impaired, and just education. So it's not really like extensive. It's very simple, but there is no loss in federal funding. So we had to kind of start at the federal level, work our way down to the state level, and then look at the laws in the state. And the medical bill is important. Some certain states have put in language in the bill to help first responders actually have access, like California, Washington, Virginia. And so that's important. Language is super important, how it reads. I found a lot of people that don't read the language very well and they just assume that it means something. And it's very important when you have different words in there, they mean different things on purpose. So those are the ways to kind of start and to see what is the legal ramifications and where are the requirements for testing coming from. And if it's only your employer, then that's when you start with the employer. And if the employer doesn't listen, then you kind of go above them to the city or the county commissioners and plead with them and talk to them. And really just, like I said, it's really about education. And that's what we really want to do. We're not trying to push anything on anybody, but we just want to educate people so that they really have the right information to make an informed decision. Because it really can benefit, and you have better employees. If you have better employees, those employees actually have better family life, and it directly correlates to how they're dealing with people in the community. And that's a big thing for psychedelics, I think, is that having a little more compassion and empathy and less of the burnout when you're dealing with, the repeat calls that you go to all the time. You can easily get burnout and become a little jaded and salty, people like to say, on those calls, because you run them all the time and it just gets a little bit tiresome. So I really feel like if we can heal with the psychedelics, can be a huge, improvement in mental health, and we can have more compassionate and empathetic first responders. And healthier ones too, right? Happier, healthier.
Yeah, I mean, every job is a job at a certain point, and you get used to being in a rhythm and yeah. I was a teacher for 10 years, and as much as I loved the students, sometimes there was a class and, so we at some point, everything is a job. I want to, at some point, segue into the future with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy.
Yeah.
I am just curious, was there any sort, I would imagine once this was available for folks, I would imagine there were still some people kind of hesitant, pushing back. Was there any sort of an educational program, like a video or a book? Like, how did you roll it out?
Yeah, that for me, I feel is an area that's missed, to
Oh.
be honest. And I've talked to the county about it, and I've talked to the union, and it's tricky. So the overall sense is that nobody wants to put out education about it because then it feels like they are advocating for it, right? So that's a very tricky situation. I started talking with one of our local vendors, sorry, dispensaries actually, and they really strive on education. So they actually allowed me and another board member to go through one of their community college classes on cannabis. And so we're kind of have been working with them a little bit, and I've been talking to them about putting together a PowerPoint that would be available for people, just talking, about your own endocannabinoid system in your body and how things work. And we have these receptors, right? And a little bit of history. But then also the biggest thing is it's a PRN medication. So everybody's different. Everybody's metabolism is different. Your needs are different. Your tolerances are going to be different. So you have to find that dosage that works for you. So once you find that, you can stay within this range. Obviously, today's market with recreational THC levels went really high. And so it's easy to overdo it. So we just have to, I keep reminding people just to start slow and low and work your way up to that nice level that works for you without being, going overboard, because then it can become uncomfortable, just like anything else if someone takes too much alcohol or too much prescription meds. But we do this all the time with other medications, right? You get on certain, whether it's, pain meds or blood pressure meds or whatever, you try different, either different medications that work without the side effects or different, dosages, right? So that's what it's about. Is kind of, I think we're lacking in education, and I see that a lot too. Being on LinkedIn and listening and seeing a lot of articles, a lot of people are saying the same thing, is that there's just a lack of education. And I think we're seeing some of these adverse effects that are coming up and being in the headlines, right? I think that has a lot to do with it. A lot of really high THC levels and people overdoing it. And you need to take a break once in a while to reset, all those sort of things. So I think education is lacking, and I think that is where we're falling behind in a lot of areas. You can't just give this medication out to people and be like, all right, go for it, try it out, figure it out. It's like, I just think that's the wrong way to go about it. But so we're trying to put together some stuff to kind of just help educate a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, my line with psychedelics is, why would you ever jump into the deep end of a pool if you've never been in a pool before?
Yeah.
Step
Yeah.
in. So there's zero issue with go low, go slow. And the irony that this is under the medical umbrella, and yet we still don't want to provide harm reduction instructions because it might be perceived as encouragement. What?
Yeah.
My mind is confused in that loop.
I know it's so tricky because there's just so much stigma still behind cannabis and marijuana and the whole propaganda and misinformation campaign for 100 years.
Yeah.
And we've lost so much. People don't realize that it was actually in the pharmacopoeia book, back in the early 1900s before the marijuana tax happened. So they used it all. You could go down to the drugstore and buy it. It wasn't a strong THC level. It had a smaller amount of THC and a lot more CBD and everything. But still, we used it for so long for everything. Our forefathers grew it. They used it for paper, sails, rope, everything that had oil. It was used for so many different things. And then we just all of a sudden just denied it. And we're this whole drug war, and it doesn't work. And we've denied people an actually safer thing to use than alcohol.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it is literally on the harm list as the most harmful substance over everything, illegal and
Yeah.
legal. It's crazy. And then circling back to psilocybin, that is actually the least harmful
Uh-huh.
substance on that list.
Yeah.
You know, and so here in New Mexico, we're about ready to roll this huge program out. So full circle back to psilocybin and the therapy.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're doing is just trying to advocate and for first responders to be recognized and those stigma barriers, work related stuff, peer support, integration, and the special needs that might have to be happened with therapy, and not just group therapy, but then personal one-on-one therapy as well, right? And so I actually myself I went through a Zender Sitter project a while back, and then I'm actually taking a facilitator program starting at the beginning of the year. And so my goal is to be a peer support facilitator. And I think it's really important whether we have facilitators or sitters that are peer support for veterans and first responders, so that when huge trauma does come up, there's someone there that understands and recognizes and is a little more personable to that person if they need it. And I think that's important in therapy too. We have a lot of therapists that want to get into the realm of first responders, but it's not the same as your normal everyday person. We're reluctant to talk about things. We are hard to trust people, to relieve our feelings. There's a stigma of talking about it, and no matter who it is, we're gonna feel weak to ourselves or look weak to someone else or the community. So there's a lot of barriers that have to come down in order to help first responders. So one of the things I'm advocating for as well is some microdosing policies, whether for preparation to help people open up a little bit, like you say, open that heart, get familiar with the medication and the medicine a little bit before they do those therapeutic doses. And then afterwards, they got to go back to work. So how do we deal with someone who has gone through this traumatic, exponential growth and healing with this medication, and then send them back to doing trauma again and seeing trauma? So I feel like microdosing would be a good tool for integration to kind of continue on helping with that healing and that trauma.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges when you're talking, so first of all, I do really want to acknowledge your point about like populations helping like populations. Because of my background with child abuse, that's the population I bring to me, and their ability to open up to me and talk about some of the shame, because, you know, I went through the same thing. It would be a completely different experience if I was working with a first responder and a first responder saying, you know, you've never been to a car accident scene, you've never pulled somebody out of a fire, and they're right. So I think there really is a huge amount of validity of an understanding of the source of the trauma with the people who are doing the helping. It's my opinion.
Yeah.
My opinion, dollar bill doesn't get you a cup of coffee, but I think that's really important.
It is. No, you're right. It is so important. I've had a few different talk therapists, and it's frustrating when they don't understand your work schedule. They don't understand sleep deprivation, right? How calls affect you, and long-term affection of storing all these things down inside of you because you are never taught how to process them, or any of that sort of stuff. So you just keep them down until something happens, and you end up, your backpack of emotional rocks ends up just exploding everywhere, and that's a crisis moment. And so we have those, and I had those as well, and that's what brought me into that healing, really. When I was going through right before my hernia surgery and everything else, I was at my lowest point. I had 5 years left, and I literally told my chief that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it or not for another 5 years, because I felt like it was killing me. And I had multiple injuries, and then mental injury too. And that's a hard one, because people see a broken arm as easy to recognize and it's easy to accept, right? But if something in your head is slightly off for wired weird or kind of broken right now and needs repair, it's a hard thing to admit. It's a hard thing to be vulnerable, and it's a hard thing for other people to see and have sympathy for, to be honest. And I feel like that's one thing that we kind of need to change in our industry is that sort of judgment on mental health. But I feel like that's everywhere, to be honest. There's a lot of judgment on mental health. And when you have a lot of A-type personalities and you're dealing with mental health, it usually doesn't coincide very well with that sort of, with them talking about it and everything. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, I didn't start doing any of my work until I was in my late 40s just because of shame. I completely understand that. What's coming up for me is a really interesting, I try to explain to people all the time that, yes, I know we're talking psychedelics and everybody thinks all the magic and fireworks happen during the session. The reality is the majority of the healing happens afterward, especially that first week. I liken it to a fire, that it's really blazing as soon as you are done the journey or the day or two after, and then it eventually kind of, the dilation comes back into normal, or the fire kind of calms itself down. Yeah. I'm really curious of where the research is going to go, because if I'm a first responder and I have had this treatment maybe on a Thursday, I'm not sure that first responder should be back in any sort of stressful situation for at least 2 weeks to let those first, and I'm just brainstorming, I'm not a researcher, just that it's a very ripe time for healing. And if you've just gotten pulled out of the ocean water and we got you dried off, I don't know if we want to throw you back into the ocean water until you've completely warmed up. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, I understand. And that's definitely something that's going to have to be talked about and worked out. I'm hoping with UNM, they're doing some pilot focus groups, and they're going to be doing some first responder veterans and with PTSD group studies, basically with psilocybin, and they're using whole flower actually as well. So they're not using synthetic or anything. Mm-hmm. They just talked about that recently at one of the New Mexico Department of Health advisory sort of Zoom meetings, which is good because a lot of people are talking about just synthetic and things like that, and not using flower just because of the inconsistency. But I think there's someone growing in Arizona that has been able to get approved. But you're totally right. So that's a hard one. They're going to have to probably look at different groups. I think that are, even anybody going back to work, you're going to need several days, no matter what, to kind of go back to work. One of the things that we've started doing in our department, it's helping is guys that do need a little bit of help, been able to give them a little bit of break by bringing them into the office for a little bit of time. So that might be an avenue that might be able to help if somebody's to that point where they're going to get a treatment, then they're able to maybe do a pay cycle in the office or something like that. That's definitely something to think about, and it's a good point too.
I think that would be a wonderful, I'm not going to use the word alternative. I think that would be a wonderful transition back versus, I just know it's such a fruitful time, and we wouldn't want to re-traumatize in any way just because we're a little bit more open during that time frame.
Right, a little more sensitive to everything. Yeah.
Rightly so. That's what's supposed to happen. That's the healing part. So,
and that ego a little bit.
Yeah. Well, so I think my question, first of all, kudos, really fabulous work and fabulous forward thinking here. You already mentioned that people, they should start looking at the language, look at their employer language, looking at the state language. Obviously, you've already kind of dealt with the federal language. What would your advice be for those first responders who are out there listening going, I think I want to start looking into this for my population. What do they do? What's the first thing?
Yeah, well, honestly, too, I'm happy to help anybody as well. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, firefighters for plant medicine at Gmail, I'm happy to help steer them in the right direction and help look over a policy with them or anything like that. But that's the first step, is to, one, look over your own policy, look over your state stuff and see where their parameters are. So one of the things that we found was that there is actually a couple of lawsuits in New Mexico. One was against the Tax and Revenue Department, and it was a dispensary that sued them for gross receipts tax for the medical cannabis that they sold. They wanted reimbursement for it, and they said no. And they were like, well, it's medical, so I think that we're going to fight you on this. And they did, and they won. And then another worker at a auto repair place hurt his back, and they wanted to pay for the opiates, but not his medical cannabis for his back pain. And so he sued them, and workers' comp now will reimburse for your medical cannabis. And then the state won, or sorry, the dispensary won against the state, and the state tried to appeal it to the New Mexico Supreme Court, and they denied hearing the case. So the case stands, right? And what the judges both ruled was that the New Mexico Department of Health medical cannabis card basically meets the prescription or the state statute for what a prescription is in New Mexico. Therefore, it's the functional equivalent. Well, that's one of our next goals, is to push and try to get some legislation change in the Land and Internet Act to reflect what has already been ruled upon twice in court, and the Supreme Court in New Mexico has upheld that by not hearing the case or the appeal to it. So we're trying to do that here in our state. So those are the types of things that we need to look at, is what does the state medical policy say for first responders or anything like that? Does it have safety sensitive language in there? That's a big one. Safety sensitive is a generic term for a lot of people to hide behind. In every language that I've seen, every definition of safety sensitive, the state definition, the federal definition of safety sensitive, it all relates to being impaired at work, but nothing about what you do on your own time, right? So it's really unfair that we're treating our first responders differently than the citizens that we actually protect and serve, and actually see all the bad things that happen. We don't see a lot of good things that happen, Nobody calls us on a good day, right? 911, yeah, just come over, hanging out. No, I'm having a bad day and something's wrong and I need your help. So we see people on their worst days over and over and over again. And it wears on you. And these guys should be afforded the same medication, the same rights as any other citizen. It's unfair that they don't, to be honest.
Well said.
Especially when you're okay with them drinking alcohol and coming in hungover. Sometimes it happens. It's just, it doesn't seem right, and it's confusing, to be honest, and it just seems a little bit unfair for sure.
Yeah. Well, again, that's stigma around that particular substance. Paul, what question have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
That's a good question. I could talk for a while, so I don't know if you want to know.
Well, what did I miss? With me being new to this space, what did I miss? What should I have asked that if I was a first responder, I would have known to ask?
Well, how do I get help? Maybe that's, maybe someone's out there listening. And I can tell you firsthand that psychedelics do help, and they help you look at things a lot differently. So when we talked about people going back to work and back to that trauma, how long does it last for? How long does that healing last for? It's up to you, to be honest. And I've said this a lot of times. These are just tools, and you have to do the work, and you have to want to do the work. Anybody can give you 1,000 different tools that at your disposal to help you and to heal you. But if you never use any of them, nothing's going to happen. So you also have to want to help yourself. And sometimes that can be a hard one. Just admitting that you're not okay and that you need some help. For me, I just made this decision after doing the cannabis when I was having the surgery. I was like, okay, man, this feels great. This is awesome. I need to get this for everybody else. And then this projected me on my own healing journey and seeking out different modalities that help me. So one of the first things that would happen is that if something was going chaotic in my house and there's just a lot of commotion, a lot of stimulation that my head started to like spiral a little bit, my wife, I would just say, I'll be right back. And she knew what was going on. And I would just go lay down, close my eyes, do 5-10 minute body scan, little mindfulness, and kind of do a reset. And then I was like, okay, I'm good. But for me, catching myself with 1-2 negative thoughts, that's the point right there that you gotta control it and bring it back in. Otherwise, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, this huge tornado. Next thing you know, it spirals out of control. It's just absolute chaos in your head and you're not thinking straight. So I think that's one of the biggest things to learn how to do, is to recognize when you're starting to get to that point where that tornado is starting to develop, and be like, oh shit, I need to stop this. Ooh, let's get in control. Do we need to do some breathing? Do we need to go for a little walk, mountain bike ride, go play some pickleball, just listen to some music, some headphones or something like that? I started playing pickleball a few years, like 3 years ago or something, after shift. And it was one of the best things. There's a lot of socialism going on there right there, right? Socializing and everything like that. But it got me to reset in my brain of this constant alertness from shift. And I could start my day. Without that, or without doing something, it was hard to transition back to a regular, normal life, because your mind is constantly thinking that you're going to get a call. That's why it's hard to sleep at stations. Even when you're not getting a bunch of calls at night, your body is still like in this, I'm going to get a call, I'm going to get a call. You never sleep really good at stations. And that's one of the biggest things that is not talked about in public service, is shift work. And it's starting to be talked about, and different shifts are starting to be talked about. But sleep deprivation really increases anxiety, increases PTSD symptoms, messes up your hormones horribly. We have guys that are in their 30s that have testosterone levels that, are guys that are in their 60s and 70s because of the sleep and the dysregulation of your body's system. So there's a lot of things that can really wreak havoc on our first responders. And I think we just need to be aware, and we need to try and help them a little bit more. They're kind of a unseen sort of group of people. There's a lot of talk with veterans and getting veteran psychedelics and stuff like that. And it's not a tit for tat or anything, and they're great. They've really advanced a lot of stuff for people. But first responders aren't being really talked about in those regards of being helped and then mentally and stuff. So we need to change that, and we need to bring awareness so that we can treat our first responders better.
Yeah, I feel the same way about abused women. They're not part of the conversation either.
Yeah,
yet. Right. I'm going to say the word yet. I think attaching a lot of this research and a lot of this conversation around veterans helps to actually take the stigma away. So, but I feel the same way about, people with child abuse and things of that sort. I will say to anybody who's listening, and you might be hearing about this kind of program for first responders for the first time, I really encourage you to do a couple of internet searches. There's over 250-ish, I think, clinical trials about psychedelics on clinicaltrials.gov right now. You can do regular internet searches over companies. Paul, you and I both know all you have to do is go on LinkedIn and search psychedelics, and you'll find out about the whole business side and people racing to get things approved. So this might seem niche right now, especially if you're only hearing about it for the first time. But trust me, there's a whole industry that's coming, and we all need to kind of figure it out so that everyone stays safe throughout the process of healing.
Yeah. And I wrote a couple of little white papers that I put up on our website, Firefighters for plantmedicine.org. And so I have a couple, one, Psilocybin for first responders, and then medical cannabis for first responders, and just a little bit of background and some information, just kind of generalizing some stuff. So that might help people to make a better decision or something like that too. But, Oregon's doing stuff, Colorado's doing stuff, we're getting ready to do stuff. So people can also travel and they can get a hold of us and we can help them get set up when everything gets going here. So hopefully within a year, we'll be able to start maybe doing some treatment on some people. So.
Oh my gosh. Paul, this has been not only incredibly informative, but an absolutely lovely conversation in terms of the optimism for the future to help out a population that really takes the time to help us all the time. So this was really a pleasure. Thank you. We'll have all of your contact information in the show notes. I would not be surprised if you have a number of people reach out after this. So I want to thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Well, I learned a ton in this conversation, and I'm really thrilled that Paul laid out some very specific steps for other first responders out there. I think it's important that everybody start to look at the research and realize that this can be a healing modality for folks in the future. So with that said, if you like this content, head on over to psychedelicscene.com for more psychedelic culture. And, if you're over there and you like the content, feel free to send Jason, our founder, a little cup of coffee because he's the one who keeps the light on. And so with that said, until next time, take care.